No postseason play for USC, so recruiting becomes paramount. And of course, we've got an early signing period as we did here in 2017. We got Scott Wolf on the line from inside USC. Scott, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. I appreciate you stopping by. This really helps out. We got a ton of people that are interested in your Trojans. Despite going 5-7, the interest is still high. It's still a marquee program, and I'm sure you and others would like to see it stay as such. And that all starts with recruiting. So we've got a class coming in that's going to be signed here in 5 days. What is your level of optimism that it's going to be a top class?
I don't have a high amount of optimism. I mean, the funny part about USC is they always have a top 10, or it's not unusual for them to have a top 5 class. And if you look right now, it's about 30th overall, which is really low for them. And, usually what happens, you've got 2 signing days, but in the past, the February signing date, they would close really strong and they would get, in the top 5 or top 10. I don't know if there's enough guys out there for them to try and get, or if they can actually land enough guys to get that class up to that ranking. So there's a potential they could have, one of their lowest classes in many years. And they've got about 12 guys visiting today and the rest of the weekend. So this is like their big recruiting weekend of the year. But I don't know. There's a lot of guys that are recruiting that have been offered by schools like, some of them are really not great schools at all, but they're going after guys now. They're committed to Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, Arizona, Colorado. In the past, you didn't really see that. So tomorrow, Kayvon Thibodeau is considered, one of the top players in the country. Some people might say he's the number 1 player. He's from Southern California. He's going to announce on ESPN where he's going tomorrow. And he doesn't even have USC in his final 4 choices, which is shocking to me.
Yeah, so it's a situation there when you start to mention schools that are on the short list of some of these players. Obviously, when you're a fan looking at what are the other schools competing for this particular player, you want to see the same schools that are in your same echelon of schools. Those aren't. Even though North Carolina State has had some successful seasons, they're just flat out not on the same par with USC, Georgia Tech, and some of the other schools that you mentioned. So I think for any one particular player, it's not an issue if you think that you trust your coaching staff and maybe they just really like this particular player for some reason. But if you see that with several players, then it's not necessarily a good sign. And Scott, to your point, it was the number 4 rated class last year, according to 247 Sports. This year at number 28 with, again, 5 days until the first signing period that is proven from last year to be about a 75 to 80% signing ratio to what we've seen in February. So in regards to this particular class, is there a particular need or two that we can that maybe recognize in terms of positions?
Well, they've got to, not surprisingly, they've got to shore up their offensive line and their defensive line. And, I think the jury's out on how well they're doing that right now. But those have been areas of need for several years. And when they've played schools like Notre Dame or Alabama or Ohio State, it's been a problem area for them. So they need linemen. They always seem to be good at getting receivers. They can go get a quarterback. They can get a tailback. But what they really need are linemen. And also they need cornerbacks, because this past year, I think we've talked about it more than once. The secondary was a trouble spot. So they could use corners. And they've offered 3 guys this week, which it tells you something about their recruiting, I think, when you're offering guys in mid-December, because you should already know who you want and be close to getting them. But, they've had a tough recruiting year, and then there's been all this turmoil with the season and the coaching status of Clay Helton. And they fired 3 coaches a couple weeks ago. So there's just been a lot of negativity. And I'm sure it's all added up to take a toll on the recruiting class.
Yeah, when you're throwing out that many offers with less than a week to go, it seems to be a bit of a scramble. 10 of the 15 hard commits right now, not surprisingly, from California. Of course, the overall national rank and rank within the Pac-12 that's at the top 4 in the Pac-12 also relates to the volume. And the volume with 15 hard commits right now isn't that high compared to some other schools because the star ranking doesn't appear to be that far off of what it's been in the past, with 4 stars totaling 7 of the 15 commits from what I see, according to 247 Sports. Any particular players here that you like?
Well, the biggest recruit they had was Chris Steele, a 5-star cornerback from St. John Bosco, a huge school, but he decommitted during the season, and they're on his list, but he's not favored to go there. There's still guys out. They've got Brew McCoy. Some people think he's the #1 receiver in the country from Mater Dei, visiting this weekend. Some people say he's going to SC for sure. Some people tell me he's going to Texas for sure. But when you have a Mater Dei receiver, you have to get them because that's like USC's backyard. So that's the one guy they've been zeroed in on the longest. Kyle Ford, a 4-star receiver from Orange Lutheran, is there this weekend. But again, it seems like they always manage to find receivers, no matter how good they're playing. But they have to get linemen, and I think that's where they fall short versus the Alabamas and Georgias and Clemsons and even the Ohio States and Notre Dames is in the trenches. So they've got to go out and find some guys, and I don't know if they're going to be able to do it this year.
So Jason Rodriguez, of course, right now stands as their highest starred prospect that has already declared himself to be a hard commit and is almost guaranteed to sign with USC. And he's the 14th rated offensive tackle, to your point. So he's a highly rated guy, not in the top 10, but still highly rated. But you can't build offensive and defensive lines with one guy. So you need droves of these guys because they're not all going to turn out. And you try to play the numbers game to say, hey, we signed 8 premium offensive linemen, probably 5 will turn out and maybe 1 becomes a star or 2 become very strong impact players, and you go from there. All right.
The problem too is, and some of the recruits are finally seeing it, are they going to develop when they get to USC? And that's been a criticism the last 2-3 years. So if they don't develop, it doesn't matter what the star ranking is, because none of these guys are coming in and, becoming world beaters once they get there. So there's an issue once they get there in developing the talent, and they have to prove they can do that.
Yeah, you mentioned this Southern California talent, which is just about as good as anywhere in the country for the most part. And when USC has had a minor slump or 2 in the past, you were losing those recruits to UCLA, or if Washington was extremely strong coming down the coast. But it appears as though the entire nation is coming in and stealing some of the top players that they weren't able to. Ohio State stole a kid from Southern California last year. Of course, as you mentioned, Chris Steele, he's got it down to Florida and South Carolina from what I hear. That seems just unfathomable for a Southern California kid to be considering those 2 schools. So it's not just the Pac-12, but the entire nation. Some of those big powers. Alabama's come out to California in recent years, which something they didn't do prior to that. So USC has competition on all fronts.
Well, yeah, and one interesting thing is there's 2 guys right now who are committed to Oregon. One is from Narbonne, and the other is from Mater Dei. And I can't recall, them losing a couple guys like that to Oregon. And that's one of the reasons Oregon, I think, has a top 10 class at the moment. So I don't know if they're not evaluating properly, or if they're just taking too long to offer guys, or what. But like I said, when you've got like the number one D lineman in the nation, and he went to Dorsey, which is about couple miles from SC. Then he transferred to Oaks Christian, another school where they get players constantly. And he doesn't have USC in his Final Four, but he has Oregon in his Final Four. That's a warning sign to me.
And I think there's a reason why these schools obviously bring these kids on recruiting weekends during the season. They want them to see the fervor, the fan base, the packed stadium, the excitement, and the fever pitch of the volume and everything going on, and the prestige of the program. And that's always going to be impressive at USC, but much less so in a season like we just had, 5 and 7, when there's going to be 30 or 40,000 empty seats, and there's not going to be a whole lot of buzz in the stadium as there has been in the past. And if they're marching off to an SEC school or a few of the places in the Big Ten, then they're going to feel that impact. They're going to feel that environment, and that's an emotional draw to a kid. It's not everything, certainly, but kids being emotional, certainly at that stage of their life, tend to make decisions in that manner. Any other thoughts on the recruiting trail, Scott?
Well, the big thing is, like I said, in past years, they've been able to close really strong and get guys even on signing day itself. But I just don't know. This year, it feels like a lot of guys have committed early to other schools, and I don't know if there's enough guys out there that they can even try and get at this point to get that recruiting class up into that elite level ranking. And, it's ironic. A year ago, Lynn Swan, the athletic director, gave Clay Helton a 5-year contract, and he said one of the reasons he did it, it was announced right before signing day because he was worried about recruiting. Well, here we are a year later, and Helton's got 4 years still on his contract, and the recruiting class is going to be right now it's one of the worst in many years. So we'll see.
Yeah, and even if they close strong, you're not going to jump from 28 to 5. You're going to jump from 28 to 23 or something in that range. So it's barely going to be a top 25 class regardless. And the number doesn't mean everything. Certainly there are examples around the country, the likes of Wisconsin and Michigan State, that make it work for whatever reason. They just are amazing with talent development. They make top 15 programs out of top 35 to 40 classes, but that's typically not the way it's done, and certainly not at USC, Ohio State, Alabama, those kind of places. They bring in the top talent, and that's one of the reasons why they win at the level that they do when they're on their game.